Thank you for tuning in today. This is part of a series of interviews that we've done at Diligent Plans to provide information and resources for those of you in the struggle like we all are, and especially if you're in some type of leadership role, either formal or informal. Today, I have a very special guest, someone who I consider a lifelong mentor and a friend, someone I look up to in every way. In fact, he was my instructor way back in the 90s when I was a cadet at West Point, Colonel Joe DeAntona. And then after that time, we lost touch, and I didn't have the good fortune of serving under him directly, but we ran into each other later in life, I guess, at an Army-Navy game of all things, a viewing at Fort Bliss. And we reconnected and been in touch ever since. But I'm going to turn it over to him. He's got some great stuff to share with you, but let me just hit some highlights first. And believe me, if I went into detail, this would take up the whole interview. I'm just going to hit the high points. Colonel DeAntona is a West Point graduate, also an Army football player. He went into the military as an air defender, and he was able to command at 3 distinct levels in combat. 3 combat commands, which is very unique. Mixed in with that experience, he was also brought back to the academy for 3 different occasions where he served in the academic department, he served in the physical development department, and he also served in the military development department at West Point. So all 3 pillars of ways the academy develops cadets, Colonel D was brought back to be of service. It's a rare opportunity to serve in one. He was brought back 3 times. That's amazing. Also of note, he was married. He's been married for 35 years. Just had an anniversary here in March. 35 years to Lisa. They have 4 grandkids, 2 kids, and he's just had. When I ask him about his family, he just bubbles over. He's a family man and a leader, and a great resource for now, for this time that we're in, for this COVID crisis. So that being said, I can't go into any more detail, but Colonel D, thank you so much for joining us today.
Chris, it's a real pleasure. It's always fun to talk with you.
Yeah, I was excited when you agreed. I agreed to do this. I know you're a really busy guy and you got a lot of stuff going on. But I think some of the insights you're going to share about crisis and how to kind of thrive in that time is going to be invaluable to everybody. Could you talk a little bit about your crisis experience firsthand that you've experienced over your career?
Well, Chris, first off, I've had an absolutely wonderful career as an adult. Most of it, as you know, in the military for about 30 years, and then most recently in my second career as an executive in the defense industry. But as I was reflecting on your question, I thought about crisis and where do you learn and how do you kind of weave together your understanding of crisis? And I think I've had probably 3 unique different experiences. One, as you mentioned, was my military experience. Crisis happens on a day-to-day basis. As a professional, anytime you're a leader of people, you're going to deal with crisis on a daily basis. So you've kind of got that day-to-day crisis management skill that you learn to deal with. And then in certain circumstances and certain situations, you move into another type of crisis management. And that's when there is a real or perceived danger that you and or the people that you're responsible for have to face. And so you learn some skills and experiences that help you deal with that type of crisis. And as you and I were talking earlier, I think there's a couple of those types of experiences that I've tried to reflect on this COVID-19, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. The second one, though, frankly, is as an industry executive, and it's a different type of crisis. You do still have a lot of near-term, real-time requirements that you have to meet. You have customers in the market that I'm in, which is the defense market. You have customers that are facing real dangers and real crises, and you're part of their solution. So you want to work very hard to help them achieve that. And then at the same time, you have people underneath you who are looking to you to help guide them through the crisis. And it's interesting because I'm not learning, the COVID-19 crisis has occurred during my defense industry career, not during my military career. And so I'm learning a lot of aspects of crisis management with COVID-19 in my current career. And then the third one I will tell you is being a husband and a father. If you're a parent, if you're a spouse, then you are a crisis manager. Let's not kid ourselves, right? Particularly when you introduce children into the equation. And so I think that there are some certain aspects of just the title of being a parent and a spouse that make us somewhat experts in crisis management. But when you take a look at all of those, Chris, I think the things that I'm learning and that I'm trying to apply to COVID-19 are a couple of things. One is this is the new normal. And what I mean by that is when I went into combat for the first time, frankly, when we were cadets at West Point for the first time, when I became an industry leader at age 56 for the first time, they're unknown environmental situations that we are embarking on. And so there's some anxiety, there's some nervousness. Frankly, there's probably some fear that come as a result of embarking on a new environment. And when you think about the COVID-19, that's what COVID-19 has done to us. It has put us in an environment where there's an unknown, there's a little bit of fear, there's a little bit of anxiety. And I think when you kind of enter into these things, what you realize over time, and I think this is the human nature of us, is you will start to level set from a pure survivability instinct. You will normalize the environment that you're in, even though the environment that you're in is not normal. And for adults, for example, I think we all went through this with 911. 911 was an event. It was a period of time in our history where beforehand we had a sense of normal, but coming out of it, we had a new set of normal. And we've been living with that now for 20 years, and it's normal, right? We don't think about it anymore. We don't think about all of the precautions that we go through, all the security checks we go through, getting through an airport. That's just the new normal. Prior to 911, that was all a big hassle, but it's the new normal. I think the COVID-19 will create a similar type of change to what we know as normal, but it's not going to be something that we're going to wrestle with. We will just accept it over time as our new normal. Combat environments were the same way. First day you deploy into an environment, it's all unknown, you're scared, you're wondering, how am I going to do this? And what you start to see with yourself and with your soldiers over time is you start to adapt to the environment you're in. And again, I think it's kind of a survivor's instinct, if you will. And over time, you figure out how to operate on that. And once you figure out how to operate in that environment, that becomes your new normal. So first and foremost, I think that the crisis management experiences that I've gained as an adult that are allowing me to try to lead in this new environment of COVID-19 is the whole idea that there is a new normal, there will be a new normal, and we will be okay as we normalize ourselves to the new environment. The second thing is, this too will pass. Okay. No different than getting through West Point plebe year. This too will pass. No different than going through my first combat experience. This too will pass. No different than having to brief the CEO of a Fortune 100 company, this too will pass. COVID-19 will pass as well. And I think that if you have a strong support network in family and friends, for me, I use my faith. I lean on my faith, and I've always leaned on my faith during these times of crisis to help me get through it, and I continue to do that.
Do you mind if I ask something? You mentioned faith. Would you agree that maybe that's one thing that's been constant, as a leader up and down through the different things you've done, combat, peacetime, different scenarios? Isn't faith a source maybe of a continuity across all of those that you can rely on equally at different times?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, because some of the crises that I've dealt with have been just crises of time and or resources. Some of them have been crises of actual physical danger or perceived danger. And regardless of what the cause of the crisis is, my faith has been the level setter to help take me through that. I do wonder oftentimes how people without faith can get through a crisis, because I rely on it so much. And I think, what if I didn't have this? How would I get through it? And I can't imagine that. It's so ingrained into who I am that I just can't imagine it. And we all kind of embrace faith in a lot of different ways. But I always, I hearken back to the passage of blessed are you who have seen and believe, but blessed are those who have not seen and believe. And when you go into these crises, you don't know, right? So it's like you can't see, but you have to believe that if you go down this path, that it'll be okay. And so yes, I absolutely believe that of all of these things, my faith, from the time I was a young boy through my plebe year at West Point, all the way through everything I've been through, the one common denominator in all of those crises in my life has been my faith. Yes.
Wow. I think you alluded to, even when you're not sure what is in front of you, you have to have hope. Do you believe as a leader, I like to use this term, I don't know if I've coined it or, sometimes you forget what terms you've coined as your own over the years. I always like to say leaders are dealers in hope. So not only in the crisis are you looking to your faith for your own source of hope, do you think it's important for leaders during this time to spread hope among their teams?
Oh, absolutely. I have a similar type of phrase that I use, and again, it wasn't mine. It's something that I heard before, but it absolutely resonates. Organizations, I used to say units because I was an Army, as a soldier, but organizations take on the personality of their leader.
Wow.
And so if you have a leader who is positive, if you have a leader that is hopeful, if you have a leader who's empathetic, that organization will be positive and empathetic. If you have a leader who's negative, if you have a leader who is derogatory, if you have a leader who, that's the kind of organization you're going to have. So I couldn't agree with you more that the hopeful, positive vibe that a leader has, and I'm not talking that you have to be the CEO of a company, although I would say the CEO of a company, the commander of an organization, the head of a household, the owner of a business, your organization is going to embrace your values, which includes your faith and your belief. I would say your beliefs and your hope, more than one would realize. And I think that's one of the reasons why being a leader of people is so important, because in many cases, folks don't understand how influential they are on the organizations that they do lead. So I couldn't agree with you more, Chris.
Yeah. It's funny with little kids. I have some little ones, and the things that I casually mention end up becoming things they say all the time. They may hear it 3 times, and then all of a sudden it's like, sometimes, we pray at dinner, and a lot of times I'll ask one of the kids every once in a while, hey, would you go ahead and say the prayer? What comes out of their mouth is very similar to what dad has said in previous nights or what mom has said. It's amazing. It's amazing. Even when you don't realize it.
Well, there's the old saying that, in soldiers, we said this: soldiers don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Yep. And caring doesn't mean coddling, but it means a real commitment and a dedication to helping them develop and grow as the people that they are. And our children, in a roundabout way, and I'm an Army, our children are our soldiers, and so they'll listen to what you're saying. But the truth is, more than anything else, they're watching what you're doing. And when your actions and your words line up, that is a very powerful combination for young people to be able to experience. When there's a dissonance between what you say and what you do, now you've created a gap, and you've created an opportunity for someone else to fill in the gap. And sometimes the person who fills that gap may not be the one that you want to fill the gap for your child or for the people that you're leading.
That's a great point. So the leaders that take this to heart, I'm sure, trying to think of how to word this. So they know they're under the microscope. They know they're being observed. And I think sometimes the pressure builds up so high that they feel, I got to be perfect all the time, and I can't show weakness and all that. Do you think it's valuable, Colonel D, to show vulnerability and transparency sometimes? Maybe not indecisiveness on the other side of the coin, but how do you feel about that? About a leader who maybe even breaks down every once in a while? Yeah. Is that helpful? Or
I think one of the strongest qualities for a leader to connect to the people that he or she is leading is the demonstrated understanding that you are a human as well. I remember as a young boy growing up, and you saw your teacher, but the only place you saw your teacher was in the classroom. But when you would see your teacher, like in the grocery store, you'd get all giggly because you're like, oh, Mrs. Jones shops too. But because I held her in such high regard that I didn't think she lived a life like I did. And all of a sudden I find her shopping at the store like I'm shopping at the store, or maybe at the public swimming hole, like I am. And it would be kind of giggly. But what that reminded me of is that it is very important for us as leaders to communicate and to emulate that we are humans just like our soldiers. And sometimes that means, depending on how comfortable you were, I was a pretty transparent leader. It's sharing some of my shortfalls. The one thing I had in common as a full bird colonel, that so did the private first class in many cases, is that we were parents. And parents all have the same problems. And so when you would sit down with those young soldiers and you'd kind of share maybe some of the challenges that I was having, in my household, without getting into too much detail, then they would start to open up. And at the end of it, they would come up and they'd say, Colonel D, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you sharing it, because I thought I was the only one going through that. But I guess it's not just me, because heck, if you're going through it and I'm going through it, then maybe I'm making this a bigger issue than it really is. And so, I think connecting on a very human level is absolutely essential to establishing a trusted relationship with the people that you lead.
When I first started speaking, I guess professionally, you would call it, a number of years ago, I had some mentorship And the mentor told me, hey, you always have to look, 10 steps above the audience. You got to wear the nicest suit and everything's got to be all tucked in and buttoned up and everything. And you have to look really sharp. And now I do agree in preparedness and knowing your content and delivery, but that didn't seem right with me. So a short time after I did that a couple times, I started to ask my audiences, or I asked the event planners, what's the audience going to be wearing roughly? And I would try to be somewhere within that range of what they were wearing. And you know what? My relatability went up. People think, I think, more comfortable talking to me afterwards. I don't know. It just seems like you have to meet people where they are to really get into their soul, their psyche a little bit. So that seems.
Well, there's some people who feel that they have to be able to be at the highest peak and to speak down and to direct downward. There's other people who believe that the most effective way of leading and speaking is being amongst the population. Yeah. And there's two different approaches to that. And you've got very autocratic societies like the very defined downward hierarchy. I think what we have found is the most effective organizations are the organizations that operate from kind of within, if you will. The whole adage, remember there was a time, Chris, even in the military where, the officers messed in a separate location from the enlisted. And then when we transitioned to an all-volunteer army, one of the things that we realized that we needed to do for people who volunteered to serve is that, we had to create a more intimate understanding and relationship between the officers and the formations. And so all of a sudden we got rid of the different messes and we started messing together. And then we took it a step further, which said, as a leader, I'm a servant to you and you are going to eat first and then the officers will eat. So think about that from a leadership perspective, just using the military as a profession, what it used to be to what it is today. It's gone almost 180 degrees. And I would argue that the military we've had today and over the last 20 plus years is the best military that the world has ever seen. It's not coincidental that we've taken a more hands-on, a more lead from the front, but lead from the formation approach to leadership that was different than it was, decades and centuries ago.
Yeah. I just watched recently, We Were Soldiers.
Yes.
With Mel Gibson, talking about Hal Moore, of course, in Vietnam. Yeah. And I still remember the speech that Mel Gibson delivered, very closely accurate to what was actually given, where he said, I'll be the first to sit down on the field and I'll be the last to step off. I guarantee, and oh man, first in, last out, make sure everybody's taken care of. And that mentality is, I think, so key now.
Well, think about it too. To the day that he died, how more soldiers revered him as the consummate leader. 50 years after, Vietnam, his soldiers to this day just looked at, had the utmost respect for him. He was a trailblazer. Yeah. At the time, and I'm glad that we were able to take his story and share it. And to your point, I think very realistically in the form of a movie, so that other people can learn about what that type of leadership can do in the harshest times.
Absolutely. I'm hesitant to ask this question. It jumped into my mind. It's been a burning topic lately in my mind. It could probably be a whole other interview, but I'm going to ask it just because I'm really curious to hear what you have to say. Gentlemen like Hal Moore, honestly, sir, gentlemen like yourself, you seem to appear in more rare occurrences nowadays. There seem to be back in 100 years ago. It seems like there was a ton of leaders like that, but now it seems like there's less. Do you think there's less nowadays that are going to, kind of fall on their sword for their people and serve and sacrifice? Or do you think leadership has changed a
Yeah.
little bit?
So that's a great question, Chris. I don't think that there are less.
Okay.
What I do think is happening is I do believe that some of the developmental experiences that I had, while you mentioned that I had 3 combat tours, I had 3 combat tours over a 25-year period.
Mm.
There are veterans now that are having 3 combat tours in 5 years. So I had a chance to reflect. I had a chance to grow. I had a chance to think and study to take it to the next level. One of the concerns that I have is that whether we're in industry or whether we're in uniform, we are operating at such an intense op tempo, an operational tempo, that sometimes I think it does have a negative impact on the personal development and reflection that we have. So I think those people are still out there. I think, frankly, that they're out there probably in larger numbers than ever. But the truth is that the cycle with which we are operating does have an impact, and I think part of that impact is, in some cases, a delay in that leader development approach, if you will, that you can have. I mean, my first combat tour was 1990. My second combat tour was 2002. I had 12 years to reflect.
Wow.
And to learn and develop. Some people are getting 12 months. And I think as a result of that, you kind of get into almost a robotic approach. When your tempo is so fast, you don't have time to reflect. You don't have time to have some introspection. You just start to become automatic in what you're doing. And when you become automatic in what you're doing, it can manifest itself sometimes in maybe less empathetic of a leader, maybe less hands-on as a leader as you might want to be. So I think they're out there. I think the environments are different that maybe are disguising the fact that they really are out there in the same numbers that they were in the past.
Wow. Man, someday I'd love to revisit that with you again. I learned so much from what you have to share when it comes to topics like that. I think there's a lot more to uncover there, but okay, that's good perspective. I think you probably agree that empathy is one of the strongest suits a leader can have during this COVID-19 crisis, especially since people are hurting. I mean, I read an article the other day about pets being in disarray. Even, there's a dog that used to be alone during the day. He was the alpha. Now the family's there. He's like, where do I fit in? Am I the omega? Am I the, So I think empathy is probably one of the biggest leadership traits that is important right now. Would you agree?
Yeah, it is. And, empathy, in my opinion, independent of the COVID-19 environment. But I believe that if you ask me what is the single biggest discriminator in effective leadership, it is a leader's ability to be empathetic. And some people say I believe that empathy can be a learned skill. It takes time, and I think we're addressing it. But I also believe that I had an advantage. Again, when I go back to my faith, I learned at a very early age some of the basic rules of kindness and humanity that were taught to me in the form of my faith, and so they became part of me. But some people have to get it in other ways. But you can learn to be empathetic, but you have to desire to learn to be empathetic. And in order for you to desire it, you have to believe that it is an effective tool to be a leader. So it goes back to that old discussion we were having before, somebody sitting on the perch and barking down. It's going to be hard to convince that kind of person that empathy is an important piece. But if you can find somebody who naturally or wants to be comfortable in operating amongst the formation, then that person who can develop empathy is really going to develop into the type of leader that we want during times of crisis, because it is during times of crisis when empathy doesn't need to be something that you go to your checkbook and go through. It has to be something that your people they've already given you that badge of honor, because you've already been able to demonstrate in non-crisis environments that you're empathetic. And boy, now that the crisis has arrived, that empathy is going to be even more powerful and more valuable to your organization. It's hard for non-empathetic people to start demonstrating empathy during crisis.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't appear to be genuine.
Right.
And the one thing about empathy is it's genuine. Your formations will know, they'll know whether it's real or not. Just like your kids, what you say and what you do, you know what I'm saying? When they match up, it's a real strong thing. Empathy is the same way. You can talk about being empathetic, but unless you demonstrate empathy, people are not going to embrace it. But I also believe that in times of crisis, empathetic leaders are more valuable than ever, because they have this unique ability to walk in someone's shoes, to feel their pain, to help them understand. Not being sympathetic. There's some people that confuse sympathy and empathy, but it's being able to appreciate and value how someone is perceiving a situation, even though it could be different than how you as an individual are doing it.
Wow, man, that's a great segue into this last part that I'd like to ask you. So empathy, I always looked at it as, you mentioned desire. If someone has a desire, they can get good at it. I always like to relate it to, I've always had a desire to dunk a basketball, but I don't have the physical attributes to be able to do that. But with empathy, I think if you have the desire, there's no limitations to how far you can take it. You could be the most empathetic leader in the world. I think if you set your heart to it and you study it and really apply it to your life. So there's no limitations, I don't think, other than, like you said, that desire at the onset. Hey, so that's a great one. So if you're a leader out there, empathy, like Colonel D said, empathy is critical. Colonel D, so boy, we could have taken any one of the great just nuggets of wisdom that you mentioned and gone very deep on any of them. But for anyone listening right now, if you could leave them with a few things that, without having to have them understand the basis for it, but just things that they can do. I think you mentioned empathy already. That's a good one, but there's certain things that leaders should or could be doing right now that would be specifically helpful in time of crisis.
Sure, Chris. And again, whether it was post 9/11, whether it's your first combat experience, whether it's transitioning to a brand new career where you don't know anything, and whether it's living through and trying to lead through COVID-19, I think there's a couple of basic principles that leaders always need to aspire to. The first one is take responsibility. Take personal responsibility. Lead by example. It's so important. Again, I keep going back to what you say has to match up with what you do. And so I ask leaders all the time, do the self-evaluation. Is what you're saying and what you're doing, do they line themselves up? If they don't, that's the first thing you need to do. You need to line up your behaviors with your narrative, because that is critically important during times of crisis. You don't want to create a gap. You want them to be synonymous to the people that you're leading. The second thing is crises are scary. They create anxiety, fear. The leader, units take on the personality of their leader, right? We talked about that. You have to stay positive. This too will pass. Yeah, we can't do this, but we can do other things. It is even if you're having a bad day, as a leader, you can't have a bad day. You really are on display, and I'm talking about with your children, with your employees, with your soldiers. By virtue of the fact that you are the leader, whether you're the designated leader or whether you're the informal leader, you have to stay positive. It's contagious. So is negative. Negative vibes are contagious too. So pick that positive vibe and work it into your conversation every day. Simple things, just saying thank you more often than you may have in the past. Taking a minute to ask somebody how they're doing rather than the 15 seconds that you might have done in the past. That extra 45 seconds is going to go a long way in helping that individual or that group of people through their environment. The third one is, and we've already talked to it, Chris, empathy.
Yeah.
So for me, it's take responsibility, lead by example, stay positive, and demonstrate empathy on a regular basis. And if you can do those three things, particularly during crisis, the organization that you're leading will not only survive, the organization that you're leading will come out of this crisis bigger, better, and stronger than it was before the crisis as it started. And I think that's why some people shy away from being leaders. They don't want to take responsibility. It's hard for them to be positive even when they don't want to be. And in some cases, they don't have a desire or a wantingness to be empathetic. Well, that's okay. And, not everybody should be or can be a leader. But if you want to be, those are the three things that I would argue are where we should focus our efforts. And they're all behavioral. And to your point, you don't have to have a special skill, just a desire. All three of those things are driven by a desire to be a good leader.
Wow. Those are some remarkable things for people to apply. Coming from, like I said, one of the best leaders that I had a chance to know. I wish I had a chance to serve under you during the military, but for those of you watching, it was funny. I hadn't seen Colonel DeAntona for 15 years probably, and I've been out of the military. And we run into each other at this event, and I walk up to him. He's a I think you were a full colonel at the time. I think you were a full bird. He's a full bird colonel. And here, I'm some civilian at that point, right? No rank or whatever. I just, and I run up to him and I reminded him who I was. And as soon as he remembered me sitting in class, man, he gave me this great big hug, treated me almost like a peer and an equal. Of course, I never see you in that light, but I'll tell you what, that kind of devotion to people and that kind of care, even after 15 years had passed from me being a lowly cadet in this class, has always stuck with me. And honestly, Colonel D, I want to tell you, not just for everybody listening, but just for you personally, I've always tried to model many of the things that I saw in you that go all the way back to West Point. And I've always used that as a barometer for my success as a leader. So I thank you for that mentorship. Well,
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's funny how our relationship started off. Was it 1994, 95? When were you a plebe? 94?
95.
95, yeah. So you think about that, September of 95, and we were in a very senior subordinate relationship, right? Absolutely. You were a plebe, I was an instructor, and over the course of, what are we talking now? 25 years, our relationship has taken on so many different relationships. In fact, for the people who don't know, there was a time, and to this day where, Chris is my boss also, as we work to try to share leadership experiences and opportunities with folks. So I've truly enjoyed watching our relationship grow, watching you grow. Of course, I'm exceptionally proud of your daughter, who's getting ready to graduate and commission as an officer in the Army, and the journey that she's taken. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity. I'm always available to you. And I hope that the conversation that we had today was helpful to some folks. But I do think about this a lot, and I'm not perfect. I'm not going to tell you I'm positive 24/7, but I try to be. And I think at the end of the day, that's how we're going to be judged. Did you give it your best shot every day, even though you weren't necessarily successful every day? And so thank you for the opportunity, Chris.
You're welcome. So Colonel D and I talked ahead of the interview, and he told me that it'd be okay if I'm going to give you his email address. So he's making himself available if you want to get a hold of him. I'm going to post it in the bottom of the video. You'll see it come across the screen here in a minute. But his email is DeAntona. It's JDEANTONA 84. The numbers 84 @gmail.com. Like I said, you'll see it right below us here. Feel free to reach out to him. You can also find him probably on different platforms like LinkedIn. Search by his name. Boy, what a honor and a pleasure it would be if you could connect with Colonel D like I have. Colonel D, thank you again. Really appreciate you and your wisdom today. And man, I know if the people listening apply those three things and beyond, they're just going to really reshape their culture at their organization. So thanks again.
You bet. Beat Navy.
Beat them.
Take care, Chris.
You too.